Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Joining us tonight is Professor Artur Nowak-Far. He's Professor of Law at the Warsaw School of Economics, to unpack the economic side of the Alaska summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Trump welcomed Russian business leaders but warned that no deals will happen until the war ends and threatened economically severe consequences if talks fail. With new sanctions debated in Washington, oil prices under pressure, and Russia's economy under heavy strain, we ask, what does this all mean for Moscow, for business and for Europe? Professor, welcome to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me.
A pleasure, sir. So Putin takes all these high-powered business people with him to this summit. Trump is a deal maker. He keeps reminding everybody that's what he does. Is there a meeting of minds there on the economic front, if not the political?
Well, we do not know much about the economic content of those negotiations. We may project what the stances or the mandates of the two gentlemen are. Namely, Putin would like to reestablish as much as possible the pre-war ties with the Western world, including, of course, the U.S. But the most important part for him is Europe. Western Europe. And Trump, of course, would like to use the economic content of those negotiations as important leverage to get what he would like to get. The only problem is that we cannot be sure how Donald Trump defines success or the failure. Because he tends, also in the economics side of it, tends to define everything as a success.
Okay, now explain, you said using the economic side of things as leverage. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Oh, yes, definitely. That means that, President Putin, President Trump knows that the Russian side is eager to reestablish itself as an important partner for the Western world, which it is not after the war. It's a pariah. Also in economic terms. They need to establish new ties with some new partners, and they are struggling to sell the stuff and also to buy stuff which is needed for the economy, but sanctioned.
Understand that, but leverage for what, Professor? What leverage will they get in return?
Leverage for the political solution, because the most important content of the negotiations, the core is the political, the military one. That is, Mr. Trump, President Trump, would like to make a deal, as everybody knows. Either for the ceasefire or for the peace. The ceasefire is the bottom line. The peace, everlasting peace, is something better, but he is not rising or giving rise to high hopes about the peace. He would rather go even for the ceasefire. Okay. And he's using the economic side of it as exactly as
understood. So an economic relationship in exchange for peace on the ground. Is that roughly what you're saying? Yes. Okay. Now here's my question. Let's suppose that worked. There will still be sanctions imposed on Russia. Immediately after the war. It takes time to remove those sanctions. Having an economic relationship would be in breach of those sanctions, wouldn't they?
Well, I think that is not the point how the Russians see it, or even President Trump sees it. Sanctions can be removed. The most important sanctions would be removed in one day. And of course, it will take some time to remove, to trigger the real change in the economy, so that well, it would work in the so-called pre-war mode. But of course, well, that's only a sort of a imagination.
Yes, but US sanctions.
Because of the sanctions.
So I just want to clarify something, Professor. US sanctions can be removed quickly, but Europeans also have sanctions on Russia, and they will not be removed so quickly, especially given European leaders' stance. So if US and Russia start to trade, they will be in breach of European sanctions. What then?
That's a very important point. I think that would mean that the European leaders will have to redesign the sanctions, because the American sanctions are quite important, and they sort of dovetail with the European ones. And when the let's say the US sanctions disappear, that would trigger a need for the redesign of the European sanctions.
Okay. Now, the other thing, of course, is that, I mean, conversations have already started, about using US icebreakers in the Arctic and some kind of joint ventures in Russia. It is somewhat concerning that, in effect, Trump would be opening up the money tap for Russia to continue its war in Ukraine. Are there other economic levers that Europe can pull to increase their pressure on Russia? For example, secondary sanctions.
Well, that's a real threat. Because of what you have said, and because of that triggering mechanism which I try to convey to our viewers. Europe will have to, in such a case, redesign its sanction portfolio in such a way that, the most important ones, the most independent ones of the American sanctions, the least dovetailing European sanctions, dovetailing with the US sanctions, will have to be in place, and maybe they will have to have even a stronger secondary grip over the Russian economy.
Okay, now there's a bipartisan act that's been passed in the United States called the Sanctioning Russia Act, which proposes secondary sanctions on banks and 500% tariffs on Russian oil buyers. Now, that is going to affect countries like China and India and Turkey. How do you see that playing out on the political stage, the geopolitical stage, if those countries are being sanctioned to that extent by Europe and by the United States?
Well, that has a function of stake, but within the negotiations framework, the stake is accompanied with the carrot. And what we may expect is that President Trump makes certain promises. And those promises will be, fulfilling the Russian expectations to some extent. The negotiations definitely will have to be about the removal of at least some of the sanctions.
Understood. Now, Russia's economic situation is a bit dire as well. The budget deficit exceeds $62 billion in the last 7 months. Surely now is the time to increase the sanctions on Russia and get them to the negotiating table with, the willingness to compromise on something, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the right moment. But what you see is a totally different story. Mr. Putin has come to Alaska for the negotiations with the story that, well, Russia, despite of all those sanctions, is doing quite well. Its GDP or other economic indicators are just growing, and well, they have achieved the level, the level which is higher than in the pre-war period. And that is to project a positive scenario for Mr. Trump, saying that sanctions are not really a good thing, and he will have to remove them as soon as possible because that will contribute to, a ceasefire or even peace. Of course, it's not true. And that is, the playing the signed or the forged cards with Mr. Trump, but they have, I think, hopes that Mr. Trump will somehow believe in it.
Right. Now, just in the last minute that we have, Professor, before the summit, Trump said that if there wasn't a deal, there would be severe consequences, economic consequences for Russia. What do you think those might be?
Well, that would be even further increase of tariffs of those goods, which are quite important for Russia. That would be tariffs imposed not necessarily on just Russia, but on the most important trading partners, and that will of course, make the whole economic thing more complicated because many of those sanctions will have to be applicable to China.
And to Turkey, of course, as well as India. So all three of those countries are going to pay that price, which is, of course, going to have an impact on the relationship between the United States and those countries. Professor, unfortunately, we're going to have to end our conversation here, but thank you very much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening, sir.
Have a good evening, too. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, though. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.